The galaxy had long belonged to the predators. For countless ages, their empires stretched across the stars, their banners carried on fleets that darkened entire systems. They believed themselves eternal, unshakable rulers, as unmovable as the laws of physics. They had been forged in conquest, rising from their homeworlds with the same ruthless philosophy, to dominate or be consumed. And once they had secured their place, they looked upon all other life with only two categories in mind: prey to be hunted, or tools to be enslaved. They did not kill indiscriminately, though their appetite for blood and power often suggested otherwise. Instead, they viewed the galaxy itself as their arena, and the weaker civilizations as challenges to overcome. Some were hunted for sport, their species reduced to exotic trophies locked in cold stasis chambers. Others were spared annihilation but shackled into servitude, their worlds stripped of resources while their cultures were ground into dust. These apex empires saw no moral contradiction, because morality was alien to them. Strength was the only truth, and fear the only law worth respecting. The galaxy's balance reflected their will. Systems whispered in silence, living under the shadow of fleets that could appear without warning. Entire worlds learned to give tribute before they were asked, knowing refusal meant extinction. To resist was to be erased, for who could hope to stand against species that had perfected war over millennia? Their weaponry carved through planetary shields, their soldiers moved like predators among livestock. And the worst truth of all was that most prey had accepted this order. Survival was submission, and submission was survival. Predators thrived on arrogance, and arrogance made them careless. They had not fought a true rival in ages. They squabbled with each other occasionally, testing their strength against fellow apexes, but such conflicts never threatened the foundation of their dominance. To the lesser races, these clashes were nothing more than storms between titans, terrifying, yet distant. Nothing truly changed, because even in their rivalries the predators held one belief unshaken: no new force could ever rise to threaten them. Civilization, in their view, was a ladder where only they occupied the highest rungs. It was in this environment that whispers began. At first, they were barely noticed, reports of a species from a remote spiral arm, one the predators had dismissed for centuries as primitive. Their world was catalogued long ago as unremarkable, their technology laughable compared to the galaxy's giants. They had no empire, no mighty fleets, no reputation. Their sun was a small thing, their territory insignificant. Yet the whispers persisted, stories of a species that fought with a savagery out of place among civilized stars. Predator scouts brought back unsettling reports. This species, calling themselves humans, did not break easily. When threatened, they resisted to the last breath. When beaten, they adapted with a speed that unsettled seasoned conquerors. Where most prey sought mercy or negotiated for survival, humans refused. They fought as if survival alone was not enough, as if their very dignity demanded defiance. This was a contradiction to the predator worldview, and contradictions were dangerous. Still, the predators laughed at the thought. A new rival? From such an insignificant corner of the galaxy? The very idea was beneath consideration. They had crushed countless civilizations larger, older, and richer in resources. These humans, if they dared step beyond their cradle, would meet the same fate as all before them. The predators dismissed the warnings, convinced that the balance of power remained untouched. Their overconfidence had been forged over eons, and one backwater species was not enough to stir them from it. And yet, beneath their arrogance, unease lingered. Some among them could not ignore the strange consistency of these human encounters. Stories circulated of small battles where humans had fought beyond reason, of soldiers who refused surrender even when dismembered, of ships crewed by people who fought until the hull broke apart around them. Most predators dismissed these tales as exaggeration, but the oldest among them, those who had lived long enough to see the rise and fall of civilizations, recognized the pattern. Every empire had believed itself untouchable, until the moment it wasn't. Still, pride is a blinding force. The predators chose not to see the storm gathering at the edge of their dominion. They went on, enslaving and hunting, reveling in their power. They mocked the very notion that some fragile upstart could bring them fear. But the seeds had been planted, and seeds have a way of growing where arrogance cannot reach. The galaxy's predators had grown fat on dominance, blind to the hunger of those denied freedom. And in the silence of their self-assurance, humanity was stirring, preparing to show them a truth they had long forgotten: even the strongest hunters can bleed. The first time predators encountered humanity, they expected the usual rhythm of conquest. Their ships arrived with weapons primed, confident that this new species would bow or burn like all the others. They had grown accustomed to swift victories, fear spreading before their fleets, resistance collapsing before a single decisive strike. Humanity, however, did not respond with submission. Instead of silence and surrender, they were met with defiance, a defiance so fierce it bordered on madness. The predators struck Earth's colonies with overwhelming firepower, believing intimidation alone would crush spirit. Entire cities were shattered in moments, yet something unexpected followed. Rather than scatter in despair, humans rallied. Where the invaders expected broken will, they found unity. Civilians turned into fighters, engineers transformed civilian ships into weapons, and even the wounded refused to step aside. It was not a matter of victory. It was survival carried out with a stubborn refusal to be erased. Predators had always measured strength by technology and fleet size, but humans measured it by something different. Every loss taught them. Every defeat forced adaptation. Strategies were rewritten overnight, tactics adjusted in real time. A species that had barely learned to walk the stars was matching the maneuvers of fleets refined over millennia. Human commanders took what should have been desperation and shaped it into unconventional warfare. They exploited terrain, gravity wells, and even their own fragile bodies to inflict wounds on forces far superior. What shocked the predators most was not technology, but mindset. Humans did not fight with the cold precision of machines or the predictable aggression of beasts. They fought with imagination. When one strategy failed, another appeared, stranger and more effective than the last. Where predators relied on fear to paralyze prey, humans weaponized their fear into fury. They did not cower at the prospect of annihilation, they seemed to burn brighter under its threat. In battles where logic dictated surrender, they fought harder, as though the concept of yielding was an insult to their very existence. The first victories humans achieved were small, almost negligible in the scale of galactic conflict. A single predator vessel forced to retreat. A raiding party wiped out by defenders who refused to break. But these moments carried weight far beyond their scale. The predators had always counted on psychological dominance, the moment their prey realized resistance was useless. Yet humanity denied them that satisfaction. Every engagement, no matter how uneven, ended with humans forcing their enemy to expend far more than expected. They bled their opponents dry, not with strength, but with relentless will. Predators began to notice patterns. Where one species would collapse after a single decisive defeat, humans grew sharper. Losses became fuel. They dissected every battle, learned every weakness, and turned failures into lessons that could not be repeated against them. Fleets that had once dismissed humans as little more than curiosities started to find themselves unnerved. Facing humans meant there would be no easy victory, only drawn-out struggles that left scars long after the battle ended. Their resilience extended beyond battlefields. Captured humans refused to break under torture, sometimes mocking their captors with laughter that unsettled even the most hardened predators. Entire populations under occupation rose up in coordinated defiance, striking supply lines, sabotaging infrastructure, and refusing assimilation. Unlike other species that sought only to survive occupation, humans seemed incapable of submission. Their spirit infected one another, spreading like wildfire until even the most downtrodden fought with a savagery that could not be extinguished. Predators who once boasted about their invincibility began to whisper of danger. They gave humanity names meant to diminish them, mad beasts, feral survivors, but behind those words was unease. For the first time in centuries, they faced prey that did not recognize its place. What was worse, this prey was not content to defend its home alone. Reports emerged of humans striking beyond their borders, retaliating against predator strongholds with the same intensity shown in defense. They were not merely holding the line. They were proving capable of carrying war back to their attackers. Each encounter carved away at predator arrogance. They still believed in their superiority, still trusted in their ancient weapons and fleets, but a seed of doubt had taken root. Doubt that these strange, stubborn creatures might grow into something far more dangerous than they appeared. Humans had no empire, no vast armies, no advanced arsenal, yet they fought as though they carried the weight of countless generations on their shoulders. They were not prey. They were something else entirely, something the galaxy had not seen before. And as the predators withdrew from battles they had expected to win with ease, they realized that humanity's emergence was not a passing inconvenience. It was a warning. What had begun as an encounter with a primitive race was becoming something larger, something that whispered of change. For the first time in memory, the predators of the galaxy had found themselves facing an enemy they could neither break nor ignore. Fear was never supposed to exist in the hearts of the predators. For generations they had been the embodiment of dominance, the nightmares whispered about across the galaxy. But with every clash against humanity, the cracks in that illusion widened. Their commanders reported engagements that defied every projection. Fleets that should have overwhelmed were forced into retreat. Worlds once considered secure outposts were lost to coordinated human strikes. The predators, for all their arrogance, could not ignore the truth spreading through their ranks. Humans had become a force capable of turning certainty into dread. The turning point came not from a single grand victory, but from a pattern that could no longer be dismissed. At first, predator admirals claimed the defeats were due to incompetence, blaming captains for underestimating a minor foe. Yet the reports kept arriving, each carrying the same grim reality. Human persistence was bleeding them in ways no other prey had ever managed. Encounters stretched longer, casualties mounted, and even victories left them battered and uneasy. Predators who once strode with confidence began checking shadows, wondering if humanity had learned their weaknesses. Humans revealed those weaknesses with precision. They studied their opponents like hunters themselves, exposing flaws the apex species had long ignored. Over-reliance on intimidation, predictable formations, blind faith in superior technology, humans dissected them all. What had been strengths for millennia became vulnerabilities when faced with a foe that thrived on adaptation. Where the predators expected panic, they found analysis. Where they expected flight, they found counterattacks. Entire fleets were undone not by sheer firepower, but by strategies their creators had never imagined could exist. Stories of these reversals spread faster than official reports. Veterans whispered of human ships that fought until the last spark of power, of soldiers who clawed their way back from certain death, of commanders who seemed to anticipate every move before it was made. What began as rumors soon hardened into reputation. Humans were no longer described as feral prey but as an adversary with an unnerving refusal to obey the rules of war. Predators, for the first time, felt the gnawing edge of uncertainty before entering battle. The psychological weight grew heavier with each encounter. Predators had built their dominance on fear, using it as a weapon to paralyze their victims before a shot was fired. Yet against humans, fear shifted direction. Entire strike groups hesitated, their commanders haunted by the memory of fleets humiliated by supposedly primitive defenders. Doubt spread through crews, disrupting the efficiency that once defined them. Confidence, once their greatest tool, had become fragile. Prey civilizations noticed the change. Where once they cowered in silence, they began whispering of hope. The stories of human defiance gave them courage to resist in small ways: sabotage, refusal to comply, rebellion sparked by the mere belief that the predators could be beaten. What terrified the apex species most was not only humanity's resistance, but the ripple effect it created. For every victory humanity claimed, a dozen other worlds stirred from despair, emboldened to question their oppressors. Predators tried to smother these sparks through overwhelming retaliation. They unleashed brutal campaigns, intent on crushing human resolve through terror. Yet these efforts backfired. Every atrocity became fuel for human fury. Entire populations rallied with greater determination, fighting not only for survival but for vengeance. The predators had weaponized fear for ages, but they had never faced a species capable of transforming fear into strength. Humanity did not fracture under the pressure, it became sharper, harder, and more relentless. The more the predators struggled, the clearer it became that humanity represented something they had not prepared for. This was not just another rebellious prey species. This was a challenge to their very identity as galactic hunters. To admit fear was to admit weakness, and yet they could not silence it. Officers spoke less boldly in councils, commanders hesitated before committing fleets, and even the most confident leaders found themselves wondering if humanity had already anticipated their next move. The predators had always assumed their dominance was eternal. But eternity began to look fragile under the weight of this new reality. For the first time in memory, the untouchable hunters felt hunted themselves, not by superior technology or overwhelming numbers, but by something far more unsettling. Humanity's weapon was not a fleet or a gun. It was the refusal to yield, the terrifying resilience that turned every battle into a test of will. And in that test, the predators discovered they were not as strong as they believed. Humanity's war was no longer about endurance alone. What began as survival had transformed into something greater, the reshaping of galactic order itself. Once dismissed as a nuisance, they were now rewriting the very principles of conflict. The predators had relied on intimidation for so long that they never considered the possibility of an enemy who could fight without fear. Humans not only rejected terror, they inverted it, turning every attempt at domination into fuel for resistance. The result was a revolution in how war was fought, one that no apex empire could have predicted. Instead of mass fleets meeting in open space, humans fractured the battlefield. Small groups of ships slipped behind enemy lines, striking supply depots, communication hubs, and fuel convoys. They understood that cutting the arteries mattered more than facing the beast head-on. Every raid forced predators to divert resources, scattering their power and leaving their mighty fleets stretched thin. By the time reinforcements arrived, the humans were already gone, leaving wreckage and confusion behind. This asymmetry baffled predators accustomed to clear lines of battle. What made these tactics devastating was not just clever strategy but the will to coordinate with others. Humanity reached out to those the predators had long subjugated. Instead of offering chains, they offered partnership. Where predator coalitions had always been based on fear or coercion, humanity promised something alien to the galactic stage: respect. Species once crushed into silence found themselves treated as equals, their knowledge and abilities valued rather than exploited. For the first time, they were not pawns but partners. That difference gave them reason to fight. The coalition that emerged was unlike anything the galaxy had seen. Engineers from enslaved worlds contributed designs that had been suppressed for centuries. Guerrilla fighters, hardened by lifetimes of oppression, joined human units with a zeal born from generations of waiting. Humanity became the catalyst, not the sole power. Their strength lay not only in their own defiance but in their ability to ignite defiance in others. Predators who believed unity impossible among the prey found themselves confronted by a growing alliance bound by trust rather than fear. Symbolic victories followed. Worlds that had stood as monuments to predator dominance fell, liberated by coalitions led by human ingenuity. These victories were not just territorial gains, they were psychological blows that reverberated through the galaxy. Watching a fortress world fall to what had once been considered prey shook the foundation of predator arrogance. The message was clear: the old rules no longer applied. Tactically, humans refused to remain predictable. Every battle became a lesson in creativity. When the predators fortified choke points, humanity bypassed them with maneuvers no one thought feasible. When enemy fleets relied on superior numbers, humans fragmented them through deception, splitting forces and striking where least expected. Technology once thought inferior became lethal when wielded with imagination. What humans lacked in raw power, they compensated for with versatility, exploiting every overlooked angle, every neglected flaw in enemy doctrine. The predators realized too late that humanity had introduced an entirely new dimension to warfare: adaptability as the ultimate weapon. No matter how overwhelming a predator's arsenal seemed, humans found a way to counter it. The arrogance that had defined the apex races began to erode under constant humiliation. Their fleets returned battered, their reputations tarnished, their commanders forced to explain defeats at the hands of those once considered beneath notice. The shift was not merely military. Humanity's influence spread culturally and politically. Oppressed civilizations saw them not only as warriors but as proof that survival without submission was possible. The galaxy had long known power defined by cruelty. Now it was witnessing power defined by resilience and cooperation. This vision drew others to humanity's side, strengthening their ranks with every passing cycle. The predators, for the first time in eons, found themselves isolated. Their brutality no longer commanded fear but bred rebellion. What unsettled the predators most was the change in perception. Humans were no longer viewed as prey, not even as rivals. They were seen as something entirely new, a force that refused categorization. They fought like predators yet offered mercy like allies. They destroyed empires while building alliances. They had become the unpredictable variable that no ancient doctrine could contain. The hunters of the galaxy had built their supremacy on certainty, and humanity had shattered that certainty beyond repair. The balance of power had shifted. No longer was the galaxy defined by predator dominance and prey submission. Humanity had forged a third path, one where the oppressed could rise and the untouchable could fall. In every shattered fleet, every liberated world, the lesson repeated: the old order was dying, and the species that once laughed at humanity now had to reckon with a truth they could no longer deny. The galaxy would not be theirs alone ever again. The predators who once carved their empires from blood and fire now stood surrounded by the wreckage of their own arrogance. For ages they had believed themselves eternal, but eternity had fractured under the weight of a species they had mocked as insignificant. Human defiance had not only shattered their fleets but eroded the foundation of fear that had held the galaxy captive. The hunters found themselves facing a truth they had never prepared for: their reign was no longer unchallenged. Defeat for the predators did not come with a single crushing blow. It came with erosion, battle after battle, rebellion after rebellion, until their dominion collapsed under the strain of endless resistance. The very tactics that once guaranteed their supremacy became liabilities, predictable patterns exploited by adversaries who had learned their every move. Their fleets still dwarfed many in size, their weapons still deadly, but their enemies no longer trembled at the sight of them. Without fear, their power was hollow. Humans did not claim thrones or demand tribute. Instead, they left behind liberated worlds and alliances forged through mutual respect. This baffled the predators more than any defeat in battle. They could not comprehend why a victorious species would share power rather than hoard it. Yet this was the very thing that ensured humanity's influence grew faster than conquest ever could. By refusing to enslave, they inspired loyalty. By offering choice, they created unity stronger than chains. The galaxy shifted around this new center of gravity. Civilizations once silent found voices again, encouraged by humanity's refusal to dominate. Trade flourished where fear had ruled, and ideas long suppressed began to spread. The predators, who had defined themselves through control, could only watch as their prey built a network of strength without them. For the first time, survival did not mean submission, and this realization rang louder than any weapon humanity could wield. The most profound change was not material but psychological. The aura of invincibility surrounding the predators evaporated. They had been the specters in every dark tale, the unstoppable forces that no world dared defy. Now stories circulated not of their dominance, but of their failures. Children across newly freed worlds grew up hearing how the hunters had been humbled, how humanity had proven that even the mightiest could fall. Fear, once the predator's sharpest blade, dulled into memory. Some predator empires collapsed entirely, consumed by internal dissent once their authority was questioned. Others lingered, reduced to shadows of their former glory, forced to adapt or retreat into obscurity. Those that remained faced a choice: cling to the old ways and be annihilated, or accept a future where they were no longer untouchable. Many chose the latter, swallowing pride for the first time in their history. Even this act was a kind of victory for humanity, proof that the unthinkable had become reality. Humanity itself did not emerge unscathed. They bore scars from every battle, entire populations lost, worlds scarred by fire. Yet these wounds became part of their identity, symbols of sacrifice willingly made so others could stand free. Unlike the predators, who saw war as dominance, humans carried their struggle as a reminder of what was worth protecting. Their strength lay not in conquest but in memory, the shared understanding that survival without freedom was no survival at all. The lesson reverberated far beyond immediate battles. The galaxy had learned that true power was not measured in fleets or weaponry alone, but in resilience, adaptability, and the willingness to endure. Humanity had proven that even those considered weakest could rise to redefine destiny. For the Predators, this revelation was devastating. For the rest of the galaxy, it was liberating. The order of hunter and hunted was gone, replaced by something unpredictable, something alive. In the end, humanity did not need to proclaim their dominance. Their actions had already spoken louder than any declaration. They had entered a galaxy convinced it was immutable and left it forever changed. The Predators thought themselves untouchable, beings above consequence, but now they lived with the memory of defeat etched into their very identity. Humanity had shown them that arrogance was no shield, that resilience could topple empires, and that spirit could outlast any weapon. The galaxy would never again be ruled by fear alone. Humanity had ensured that, by existing, by fighting, by refusing to bend. And as the stars burned on, one truth echoed through every corner of space. The hunters had discovered what it meant to bleed, and the galaxy had learned that nothing was more dangerous than a species that refused to surrender.